Kim, do you think we're ready?
Can you hear me, Bill?
Yes, I can hear you, Gary. How are you?
All right, good.
It appears that you have quorum now. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Let's get started with our meeting. I'd like to call our meeting to order and welcome everybody to our second virtual meeting. I hope that everything went well for folks last time, and we'll try it again this time and hope that everybody can hear. If you can't hear or you're having problems with any of your technology, just reach out to Kim and hopefully she can help you a little bit. This is our August 28th meeting, and want to make a mention of the Honorable Judge Reeder. I'm not sure if he's with us this morning, but just let everybody know that he's planning on retiring, evidently, at the end of this month. And we just want to wish him well in this life transition for him. And if you get a chance to speak to him, I'm sure that you'll want to wish him well as well. The first item on our agenda is our review of the minutes. And hopefully everybody got a chance to review the minutes. And if there's any additions or amendments to the minutes, please speak up and let folks know, let us know so we can make those amendments. And then we'll do a roll call vote to approve the minutes. First of all, does anybody have any, take a minute and look at the minutes, review them, and if anybody has any questions or amendments to them.
This is Jay Corpening. I move to approve the minutes as submitted.
Okay, we have a motion.
This is Krista Hyatt. I move our second motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Kim, would you be willing to do the roll call vote for that?
Yes, sir. So we have Betty Budd, Tara Callahan, Darren Campbell,
Here. Yes.
Jay Corpening,
I vote yes.
Bill Davis, Mr. Davis, you may be on mute. Do you approve the minutes, sir?
Yes, I approve.
Thank you. Mr. Frank? Mr. Frank, you may be on mute. Can you, do you approve the minutes?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Beth Freshwater Smith?
Yes.
Michelle Hall?
Michelle Hall, yes.
Krista Hyatt?
Yes.
Ruby Brown Herring?
Yes.
Jennifer Knox? William Lassiter?
Yes, I approve.
Jeffrey Ledford? Kim Martin? Martin McGee?
Yes.
Perfect. Carol McManus?
Yes.
Thank you. Judge Rader?
Yes.
Thank you. Mary Stansel? Mary, you may be on mute. Heather Tarasco? Kinley Whitman.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Eric Zogrig.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Your roll call is complete.
Okay, thank you very much, Kim, and thanks to everybody for your vote. Our next item on the agenda is the Juvenile Justice Update from Deputy Secretary Lassiter.
Kim, do you want to go over those first couple of slides to help people with the process, and then I'll jump into my PowerPoint?
Sure, if you don't mind pulling those slides up, since I've already pushed the presenter role to you, that would be great.
Be glad to.
So that first slide contains a link to the public forum. So attendees to this meeting can enter in the chat box questions. If for any reason you called in or you don't have access to that chat box within WebEx, you can use that link at the bottom there where it says public comment form in order to enter a comment, and it will be submitted to me to be able to read to the members during the session. And then the next slide contains just some reminders about the tools at the bottom. So we want to try and mute as much as possible during speakers. If I get feedback from a specific microphone, I will mute it for you. So when you go to speak again, just take a look and make sure that you're unmuted. The second button shows the video view, and so if you wish to turn that off, that's your prerogative. You are required, if the video is not enabled, to say your name at the beginning of any motion or vote that occurs during the meeting, and that's part of recently passed statute. And then the presenters will be utilizing the U with the arrow up in order to present their presentations throughout the session. All right, to the next slide. And then if you, after the webinar, the presenter materials, all the PowerPoint presentations that you see throughout the meeting today will be on the DPS website under the Juvenile Jurisdiction Advisory Committee meeting section for today's date, 8/28. And that's it. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it. I'll try to get this done. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint, and I'm going to walk you through some updates from juvenile justice this morning. Move right here. Okay, so a couple of major things that happened over the last, is it not moving for y'all? Let's see.
I believe we can see the presenter screen as opposed to the screen that runs the presentation.
Okay. Let's try this. Okay, can y'all see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, if I can control it, that would be good. Okay, here we go. All right, so several major updates that have happened since the last time we met. We're working on the additional legislation that was passed by the General Assembly, House Bill 593. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the implementation of 593 so that you can hear of some of those changes that have occurred. This was one that we worked with the Sheriff's Association on. So thank you, Sheriff Campbell and the Sheriff's Association for working with us on House Bill 593, which was the removal of all juveniles from jails across the state. So we're working on that process, and that went into effect on August 1st. But I'm going to start out with some just basic updates on Raise the Age and where we are. And before I get into that part of it, I know Bill Davis recognized Judge Rader for his commitment to juvenile justice and to the Juvenile Jurisdiction Advisory Committee. As he said, he's retiring soon. And on behalf of the Secretary and myself and the Governor, we are going to be sending you, Judge Rader, a certificate that recognizes your service to the Juvenile Jurisdiction Advisory Committee as you're going into retirement. And we're very thankful for your input and all the work that you've done with juvenile justice over the years as the Chief District Judge in Wake County, and before that as a District Judge who was very involved in the juvenile justice process. So thank you for all your service, and we're extremely in debt to your knowledge and everything that you've provided to this committee over the years. So thank you so much, and we will drop this in the mail. I wish I could have done it in person, but we will virtually show it to you now, and then we will send you a hard copy. So thank you. So let's talk about the Raise the Age data, where we are. What is it looking like across the state of North Carolina right now as far as the Raise the Age data? And so this chart is the chart that you're familiar with, that I've shown several times. That kind of shows you what the data and the number of complaints look like across the state of North Carolina. And you can see that overall, the number of complaints in most districts, the blue lines are the number of projected complaints that will be coming into the system, and then the yellow line is the actual number of complaints that have actually come into the system. And you can see overall the trend has been in most districts that were pretty close to the projection. It's just a couple of the bigger districts that have actually held back the number of the overall complaints hitting the full projection, and that would be District 10 and District 26. You can see that those blue bars are much higher than the yellow line, which indicates where we're seeing those the complaints across the state. At the top of the screen, you can see the breakdown. So 8,128 total complaints, and that's just for the Raise the Age population. So that's not just all juvenile complaints that have been filed, but that's just the Raise the Age population. And of those 8,128 complaints, 830 of them have been for the A through G complaints. So those are the ones that are automatically transferred to adult court. So that's making up about 10% of the total population that's coming in for Raise the Age. And then you can see the breakdown for the H through 3 misdemeanors, so about 7,200 of those complaints are being filed on the lesser end, and the kids that are staying in the juvenile justice system. So 90% of kids are staying in the juvenile justice system for the Raise the Age population. 10% are being transferred. There have been a couple of cases now, I think 2 total, for the A through G population that have taken advantage of the remanding policy, which would allow for that a case as an A through G, that's automatic transfer. The district attorney and the defense attorney both agreed in 2 cases to remand those back down to juvenile court. So we've only seen that done rarely across the state so far, but it has happened in a couple situations. So let's look at the next slide, if I can get it forward here. There we go. Sorry. So here's the breakdown of what we were projecting as far as approved cases and how those would be treated in the juvenile justice system. So you've got the projected number of complaints coming into the system based off of approved, diverted, and closed. And so we are seeing, over the last couple of months, we've actually seen an increase in the amount of cases that have been approved for court. It started out that quite a few more than projected were being closed and diverted than what we were projecting to begin with, but those numbers have kind of started to level out over the last few months, and we're pretty much moving closer to what the projection was for approved versus diverted cases. This next slide kind of shows you the breakdown of juveniles. So you've got the complaints that come into the system, and as you all know, a kid can often have more than one complaint filed on them. And so this shows you the total number of juveniles themselves that have come into the system. And so you saw on the first slide that, we were looking at over 8,000 total complaints. Well, those 8,000 complaints have come in on 3,000 different juveniles. And so as we told you early on in the process, we thought that about a juvenile would have about 2.2 complaints per juvenile coming into the system. That's held pretty much true. So you're seeing more than a doubling of the number of complaints versus the number of actual juveniles coming into the system. The other thing that's interesting on this slide, so you saw 10% of the complaints coming in were for A through G complaints, but 13% of the population, when you look at actual juveniles, are coming in for those higher level offenses. So 13% of the actual juveniles themselves are being transferred to the adult system. And again, you can see what we projected at the bottom of the screen there, the darker green color being the projections and the blue line being what's actually come into the system. And again, most districts are holding pretty close to what we projected, except for some of those bigger districts. But it's really interesting, and I'll get to it in a few minutes here. District 18 in Guilford County has been our highest number of complaints coming into the system overall, higher than Wake, higher than Mecklenburg, higher than Forsyth, and so that's been an interesting trend that we've seen in Guilford County to start out this process. This shows you the A through G complaints versus the number of juveniles. So this shows you the actual number of complaints coming into the system, and we saw a real peak there in March, and then it started to go down with COVID. The numbers started to go down in April and May. In June, but have peaked back up in July, and I can tell you in August has stayed in with that trend also, although August is not done yet, so we didn't provide that number to you yet. But you can see the total number of kids is the blue line, and then the actual number of complaints coming in is that red line. So what's driving the A through G complaints? Our biggest A through G complaint is robbery with a dangerous weapon. And so you can see that those peaked in March and went down in April and May and June, but have gone straight back up in July as we've kind of gotten behind the COVID incidents and things have opened up a little bit. Obviously, we're still dealing with COVID, but that hasn't stopped our juveniles from getting back out there. And this is being driven by a couple of different locations. In fact, I went to Winston-Salem last week and met with a lot of the key leaders in Winston-Salem, where they're seeing a big increase in gun-related incidents. That's being driven by several different factors, one being that lots more permits are being issued to citizens. They were saying in that jurisdiction alone, they shot up from about 12 to 13 a month to over 130 gun permits being issued in March, April, May, and June, which is much higher than what they were averaging in the past. So, and with those more gun permits being issued, unfortunately, we're not seeing people taking real good responsibility with those guns. That's the main thing that they're finding in Guilford and in Forsyth, where we're seeing the biggest drivers on these numbers, is that juveniles are stealing those guns just from people leaving them on their passenger seat or leaving them in their glove compartment. And a $700, $800 gun sitting out on a seat is a pretty big enticement for someone that doesn't have any money or needs some money. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to work with those local communities about is gun rights come with gun responsibilities and making sure that the adults in those situations are taking care of those guns and putting them up and safely storing them when they are no longer in the car. The other thing that we're seeing is this trend line for the misdemeanors and the number of juveniles. Our biggest driver for misdemeanor juvenile offenses, especially for the younger population, has always been school-based offenses. And so once school kind of closed down in March, you can see that the overall number of misdemeanor complaints went down for the H&Is and misdemeanor for 3 offenses. And so that trend line is pretty much held through July. It started out in January, March, and February. We were up in the mid-500s, and then we dropped into the mid-300s for May, June, and July. My guess is that's mainly attributable to the school-based offenses not occurring. And you can see the same thing is true with the number of juveniles versus the number of complaints coming into the system. So detention, raise the age detention admissions, wanted to show you this chart because we started out strong in December and January with getting quite a few more juveniles into our detention facilities. In March and April, we tried to really, in May, we really tried to limit the population in juvenile detention, mainly because of the concerns over COVID. And so we worked really hard with prosecutors across the state, with our juvenile court counselors, with law enforcement to try to identify alternatives to detention so that we could lower that population. And we were very successful in those months to do that. As the months have stretched on here, we're starting to see that population pop back up to what we projected would come into detention. So this chart lays that out for you and shows you that in the last month that we had data, it was 93%. In August, again, is showing that uptick also, and I think we'll be at or above the projection for August as far as the number of detention admissions coming into the system. So this shows the admissions and the total number of juveniles detained versus what we projected for detention across the state. And I'm showing you these numbers because this is one of the areas where we need some additional help from the General Assembly and from the governor's office to get us some additional funds to pay for these. The biggest population where we've seen the pop in juvenile detention is obviously that A through G population. And you can see here we're well over the projections every month for those A through Gs, except for March where it dropped to 98%. But all the other months were well over the projection of what we were expecting for A through G populations coming into detention. And the fact that the thing that's really important to understand about this is because those are A through Gs, they're automatic transfers to adult court. But as our recommendation made from the JJAC was that these kids it could be up to 90 days before that transfer process takes place. And so either through indictment or probable cause. And we're finding that prosecutors and defense attorneys are taking that time to make sure that they are charging the juvenile with the right charge before they charge them with that A through G that will transfer them to adult court. So the length of stay for these kids is very lengthy. We're seeing that they're staying in juvenile detention much longer. And so because they're higher than the projection and their length of stay is longer than the projection, and that's also being fueled by the fact that Superior Court has not been meeting in a lot of jurisdictions. And so those kids are awaiting trial and waiting a long length of time before those trials are occurring. That's causing our juvenile population in detention to especially pop up, especially over the last couple of months here. So this shows you the average daily population. Before raise the age, we were well below we were averaging around 140, and that popped up to over 200 kids in March, right before COVID hit. We did try to push the population down in April and May and June for COVID so that we could do social distancing in the detention centers. But you can see it's popped right back up to almost 200 kids in July. And what we're seeing in August is that we've been over 200 kids as an average in August. So that population is growing and growing fast in those juvenile detention centers. To deal with that, you all know that we added Mecklenburg County Juvenile Detention Center, which was their old Jail North facility. They've expanded their capacity and are taking on more of that transfer population now. So they're taking a lot of those A through G complaints, and they're taking theirs, but they're also taking other counties. We're working with Brunswick County right now. We're hoping to get their old jail facility that they're wanting to transfer over into a juvenile detention facility up and going by October. We've expanded the capacity at RtA Dillon. We're up to now 20 beds there. And then we also took some of the beds from Lenore Youth Development Center and converted them into detention beds. And we did this, one, because we saw the capacity increasing, but we also wanted to make sure we could maintain social distancing. So we're trying to make sure that no detention facility goes over capacity. So we're doing a lot of movement trying to get kids into locations so that we're making sure they can be in a single bed room to allow for that social distancing during this COVID pandemic. So the governor's budget that was just released yesterday, and this is being his proposed budget, and as we talked about at the last meeting, the budget typically comes out in April-May time period, but because tax collection was delayed this year, it was really difficult to make any projections on what the revenue would look like. And we still don't have a firm revenue projection because a lot of people filed for extensions in July. And so we still don't know exactly what the number is for revenue. We're hoping to get that by mid to late September. But the governor has put out a supplemental budget, and it did include $4.8 million recurring for juvenile detention beds. And you can see the language there is exactly what appeared in the governor's budget. And so we're thankful to the governor's office for including that. This is slightly less than what the JJAC is recommending in the draft report that we sent you a copy of yesterday. But this is what they could find as far as availability of funds. As you can imagine, things are very tight with revenue and then also the spending that has had to take place for COVID-19. So we appreciate the investment, and these are dollars that we really do need as we're expanding capacity in juvenile detention centers. The General Assembly also gave us money to do the enhancements, the physical enhancements at RtA Dillon, so we can increase capacity there to another 60 beds. And they also gave us additional money to do the Perquimans Juvenile Detention Center down in the northeastern part of the state. That'll add in another 24 beds. So these dollars that you're seeing here would be used to help us staff what they've given us money to actually do the renovation zone. And so these are very necessary so that we can make sure that we have the proper number of beds across the state. The next slide that you see, this really shows you what's driving the juvenile population, and you can see by district. This is kind of just an expanded look at that first slide that I showed you on the number of complaints, but District 10, District 18, and District 26 are obviously our drivers as far as the number of complaints coming into the system for Raise the Age. And so you can see those numbers there. And I think it's interesting because 26 has always been our biggest contributor as far as number of complaints coming into the system. But with this Raise the Age population, 18 has actually been outpacing 26. And 10 is very close. District 10 is very close to what we're seeing in Mecklenburg County also. So, but overall, you can see the trend lines as far as the number of complaints coming into the system. As far as additional juveniles. This shows you the risk factors of the Raise the Age population. So this shows you to date the number of complaints that have come into the system and what risk factors they have. And so you can see there's 300 kids that we haven't been able to do an assessment on yet. Either they haven't participated in the process yet, the complaints just come into the system and we just haven't gotten a risk level assessment done on them yet. Or they've been approved for court and haven't wanted to participate in the risk assessment process yet. And so that we don't have data on 313, but you can see most of the data is coming in, and as we might expect, this older population has been higher risk than the younger population. So we're seeing those risk level 3s, 4s, and 5s being the majority of what we're seeing coming in for this Raise the Age population. So just an interesting slide if you're curious about what's really driving the pre-COVID population. We saw a lot more of the public order problems and person crimes, meaning violent crimes against a person or stealing directly from a person. And then after COVID hit, we're seeing a lot more property crimes. That shot up to 61%. So that's almost double what we saw pre-COVID. Now that COVID is in place and the pandemic is taking place, I'm not exactly sure what's driving that, other than we know that there's a lot of people in our state that are out of work, and a lot of kids that are in households where family members are out of work. I don't know if that's what's driving this increase in property crimes or not, but I thought this was just interesting to see that we actually have seen fewer of those person crimes and public order crimes. And you would think with a lot of the protests and things that are going on across the state, you would see more of those public order type crimes, but that hasn't been the case. That may be also because the number one public order crime that's filed against juveniles is disorderly conduct at school, and with kids not being in school, that's probably driving this down some. But we're seeing a lot more of those property crimes, stealing things, and a lot of car break-ins and a lot of thefts of cars that have occurred since COVID has taken place. So here's some of the summary statistics, just kind of summarize what we've talked about. Greater than expected number of A through G complaints coming into the system, which is a big driver of our detention population. So that number has been much higher than what we expected. There's been a decline in the raise the age population since March, since COVID took place. We've seen about 13% of those complaints coming in for those A through G complaints. Guilford, Wake, and Mecklenburg have been our biggest drivers of population as far as this calendar year is looking. Again, Guilford being the highest, Wake and Mecklenburg being behind them. And Mecklenburg, significantly behind when you consider the rate, looking at the total population of those counties. Mecklenburg County has a lot more population than Guilford County. Wake County and Mecklenburg County's populations are about equal as far as the juvenile populations in those counties. So their rates are pretty similar, but Wake is a little bit higher as far as this raise the age population right now. The majority of the crimes during the pandemic have been property crimes. So just some overall summary there. Now let's look at House Bill 593. House Bill 593, which is now Session Law 2020-83, basically was put in place. It did two things. It really wrapped up some of the recommendations that were made by this Juvenile Jurisdiction Advisory Committee. We got the JCPC portion was taken care of. So you may remember we made several recommendations about JCPC funding. For example, that you could have a police chief designee on the JCPC instead of the police chief themselves having to go every time. That was included in the legislation to extend the funding cycle for 2 years instead of just 1 year for JCPCs, not making JCPCs meet every month, but allowing them to decide which months that they wanted to meet in, so requiring that they meet 6 times a year, but not requiring them to be on back-to-back months was also included in that legislation. And it also gave us some flexibility about how we can use some of the more intensive services through JCPCs and through our contractual dollars. So really excited about those changes passing, but I really want to focus with you guys on what occurred as far as the jail population and what was allowed under House Bill 593. So as we've talked about in the past, the new Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act passed by the Congress last year and signed by the President said that we must remove all juveniles, any kid under the age of 18, from county jails by 2021, December 1st of 2021. And so in an effort to do that, we've been working to try to figure out what other changes we needed to make in the legislation to make that occur. We were able to do that, and this bill did that. So it only includes offenses that occur after August 1st, and so we put that in the legislation just so that we wouldn't grandfather back in any kids that were currently in the jails that were serving time there. And so we've seen the population start to occur, and so this is any new sentences that are imposed on or after August 1st. New imposed orders of imprisonment also are covered under this law, and any probation violations that occur after August 1st are also going to be handled now in juvenile detention versus going to a county jail. And so we've already started to take in some of this population. It went in effect on August 1st. So far, just the House Bill 593 kids, it's been 8 additional kids so far. What groups fall into this? It's the once an adult, always an adult. So those juveniles that have been charged as an adult in the past get a new charge, can now be housed in a juvenile detention center as long as that charge was after August 1st. All the Chapter 20 offenses, so we exempted Chapter 20 offenses, as you know, from the juvenile justice system. They stayed in the adult court system, but if you get a Chapter 20 offense now as a 16 or 17-year-old, you will be housed in a juvenile detention center. Any kid that emancipates themselves, even if they emancipate themselves, if they're under the age of 18, they will still go to a juvenile detention center. And then the previous groups of boundovers that have had previous convictions involved impaired driving, all of that population will now also go to juvenile detention instead of going to a jail. So basically, it's all the population that could possibly go to a jail in the future that's 16 or 17 years old would end up going to a juvenile detention center, even if they get a sentence in court. Let's say that it's a drinking and driving charge that that juvenile gets as a 16 or 17-year-old. That sentence that the court imposes on that juvenile will be served now in a juvenile detention center instead of being served in the county jail. So what's going on in that juvenile detention center? How does it look different than what they would have gotten at a county jail? We are providing the exact same services, incentive programs, and access to medical, mental health, educational, vocational, recreational, phone calls, visitations, etc., that we provide all other juveniles in our juvenile detention centers to this new population. So they're getting all of those services that we would typically give to any other juvenile that would come into the system to this new population. And so one of the things that we wanted to make sure was that because they're coming to us and they're in our custody, that they weren't getting different types of services than what we would expect that a normal juvenile would get. But we are looking at a different programming model, especially for those kids that are drinking and driving. A lot of times the judge will impose a 90-day or 120-day sentence on those juveniles, and so we wanted to make sure that we had programming that met the long-term needs of those particular juveniles, that actually dealt with substance abuse, and try to look at the underlying factor of what drove them to being put into the detention center to begin with. So we are developing some long-term programming for those needs to meet what the criminal court is expecting as for its specialized programming based on those offenses. So a lot of work has gone into this past. In the first part of July, we were given 30 days basically to operationalize this whole process, which may sound like enough time, but it was a quick process. A lot of work went into trying to figure out how to make this work. We had to update our data system to allow for this population to be entered into the system and expand the reasons why a kid could come to detention. In the past, you had to have a secured custody order. Now there's lots of different other forms that can end up with that juvenile coming to detention. So we had to train our staff on what to look for when a kid was being brought to detention so that we could admit them into the process. So changing all of those detention reasons, the billing process for having those juveniles in our facilities, attaching those adult orders, making sure that we could figure out when this kid needs to go back to court, working with our prosecutors across the state to figure out how do we get writs for these juveniles so that we can transport them, because the law also said that juvenile justice will transport them to court from that juvenile detention center, updating all the paperwork that was needed with our clerks across the state. We worked with AOC to develop all those reference materials and sent those things out to the clerks. We also sent letters to law enforcement, to the Chiefs Association and to the Sheriff's Association to make sure that they had all the information about how this process was going to work. We had to detail the process on how to do pre-trial releases. That's been a sticky part of this process with a lot of these transfers, because pre-trial programs exist in the county from where the kid is committed the crime, and then they're often put in a detention center that's not in the same location. how do we get that pretrial process to work. We've met a number of times with the school of government, with our legal folks, trying to figure out how do we make pretrial programming work for this population. We've seen lots of kids that are eligible for bond and pretrial release. We're having a hard time getting that to operationalize itself on the back end. So we want to make sure that we're not holding a kid that is eligible for that process. And so we're working with the pretrial release programs across the state, but not every county has one. And so we're trying to see in those counties that don't have a pretrial release program, how do we make sure that that kid can still be released from detention and still be part of that adult criminal process. So we're working with the probation violations and those modifications, trying to figure out the sentencing process. We've never dealt with juveniles in the past that, for example, were eligible for earned time or good time because that's not how the juvenile justice system works. These kids, because they are in the adult criminal justice system, are eligible for all those things. So we're trying to figure out how to train our staff on how to do that earned time, good time for this population, because we don't want to be more regressive on these kids than they would get if they were in an adult facility that's right down the street. So we're working with them. Mecklenburg County has been extremely helpful on that because they already had a process to do that with their adult population. So we're actually housing a lot of this population down at Mecklenburg's Juvenile Detention Center because they already have that classification system that allows for that good time and earned time credits. And we've also had to update our escape protocols for this population, thinking through declassification and confidentiality of records and what applies and what doesn't apply to this population. All that was done in a 30-day process, so we were ready to go on August 1st. A lot of work, and I can't thank my staff enough for working the overtime and figuring all that out. In the middle of a pandemic, to get this amount of work done was a monumental task, and I really thank our partners also with AOC, with the Sheriff's Association, the Police Chiefs Association, who have helped us along in the process to make all this happen. So as I mentioned, UNC School of Government's been a huge part of this. They did a virtual training for all our detention staff across the state, for our directors and our supervisors. They posted a blog on their website that talks about House Bill 593. So if you got more questions or people have questions in your local jurisdiction about it, I would reference them to that blog, which you can, we'll send out this PowerPoint and there'll be a link to it that you'll just be able to click on there. It's also got a great 10-minute video that just does the overview of House Bill 593 so that prosecutors and law enforcement and our detention staff can all reference back to those materials about how this works moving forward. The draft report, we sent you a copy of the draft interim report yesterday that Kim's been working on. I know we had talked about at the last meeting that we would submit a draft interim report. You guys basically have already voted on all the recommendations in that report, but we wanted to give you time to look at the report and make any additional changes to the report that you would like to make. So if you can take a look at the report and get any draft or any grammatical or even if it is a substantive change that you want put into the report. A lot of this came, McKinley, we got stuff from AOC about the funding formula for ADAs and clerks. All that's included in this report. So if everybody could just take a look at it one last time, make sure you're comfortable with it. I'm asking that you could get those edits back to us by September 2nd. And I know that's a fast turnaround, but the General Assembly is coming back into town on the 2nd. And we do want to make sure that we can put this report in front of them when they come back to town next week so they can see the recommendations that you guys have made in the interim report. I don't know that they'll act on any of them in this short session. They may come back later after the revenue projections come in clearly in the later part of September, but we wanted to make sure that we at least got the report in front of them so they could see your recommendations about any additional funding options that are needed for our agencies across this committee. And so I want to thank most of you provided a really great input that made this report possible. So we want to thank you for all your recommendations and all the additional input that you have given into the report. So take one last look at it, give us those edits, send those to Kim, and we will get a final draft back out to you by the 2nd once you guys have turned in all your edits to us. And like I said, I'd like to get the report to them on the 3rd. They come back on the 2nd, and hopefully it sounds like they were going to stay on the 3rd and the 4th. So we'd like to get it at least to the chairs and to physical research so they can look at it while they're in town. Be glad to take any questions that anybody has about any of the stuff that we presented, or anything about the report that you might want to throw out now. I know we just got it to you yesterday, but any additional comments you might have about the report, we'll be glad to take on also.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they would like to throw out about the report at this time?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
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 Okay. I was curious about the increase in detention beds as relates to the COVID epidemic, because I know that they were trying not to incarcerate certain people during the COVID, epidemic, if it were possible not to. So I guess I was curious about how the COVID testing is going on in the detention centers and how that might correlate to the number of detention beds that are needed.
Great question. Great question. So we did in March immediately try to reduce the population when the pandemic really started. So we were able to actually reduce the population by almost 30%. And that gave us a lot of room to do some social distancing. We did that through electronic monitoring and other alternatives to detention processes that we put in place. We actually went and tested all the juveniles that were in juvenile detention, and we tested all the staff in those facilities. So far, we've had a low number of positive cases in our juvenile detention centers. We've had just a couple of cases across the state in juvenile detention. And most of those cases are from kids that came in and tested positive. So every kid that comes into juvenile detention, we immediately test them when they come into the facility. And then we put them in medical isolation up to 14 days until we get the results of those tests back. And so the cases that we've had so far have all been from kids that came in from the community and had COVID when they walked in the door. And so thank goodness, every time we get a positive, we go back and test the other population at the facility to see if anybody else has been infected. But our nursing staff has done an outstanding job in our facilities. We brought on additional part-time and nurses across the state in each of our facilities so that we could have medical personnel there at all times to help with this. And we've done so far, that population of COVID positive population has been low. And so we have started to see the uptick back into juvenile detention. We feel better about it now because we know a lot more about the virus than we knew back in March. And we know that the mitigation steps that we're taking in the facilities are working. So every staff in juvenile wears a mask in the facilities. If we have an active case, we have lots of PPE that's available at the facility for the staff. And our central office has warehoused a lot of that PPE also that we can immediately send to the facility if we do get a positive case. And so we're testing all the kids when they come in. And a lot of times, for example, we just had one recently. The kid came in. By the time we got the positive result back, he'd already gone back to his family because the court released him. But it was good to share that information with the family so they knew what to take, what precautions to take in their household too. So we are doing testing with all the juveniles in those facilities.
Do you have the ability to isolate? Do you have like isolation rooms if you do get a positive within the facility?
Yeah, so that's one of the good things about our juvenile detention facilities. We house all juveniles right now in single bed rooms. And so they are isolated, they can be isolated in their one room. And then when we do get a positive case, we make sure to try to move them to a part of the facility that's less populated. But because of that, we're in a lot better shape than a lot of the jails and adult correctional facilities that And a lot of adult correction and jail facilities across the state, they double bunk, and in some places, they triple or quadruple bunk kids or older adults in those rooms. We do not do that in juvenile justice, so we have the ability to isolate those cases in our facilities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Good question.
Billy?
Yes.
Hey, this is Eric. The sort of lessons learned when you were able to reduce the population, are you thinking about maybe applying some of those same strategies or alternatives going forward to try to use more community resources and less detention space? Has there been any thought to sort of applying this even when the pandemic is over?
Absolutely. I mean, we are using electronic monitoring more than we've ever used in juvenile justice, and we're looking at ways to expand that even more for kids that are appropriate to go on electronic monitoring. But I'll tell you, Eric, the population that's growing the most for us is that transfer population. And juvenile justice doesn't have as much authority to make those decisions because now they're in the criminal court system. And those decisions really have to be made by the adult correctional or the adult criminal justice system at that point. And so that's why we're seeing the recent growth in the population has really been driven by that adult transfer population. So it's really trying to work with defense attorneys, prosecutors, the pretrial programs across the state, and we are trying to do that right now to figure out if there's a way to get those transferees that are eligible for bond to bond out. So if you look over the last couple of months, that population has been constantly growing, and because Superior Court is not meeting like it was before the pandemic, those kids are waiting a long time to go to trial, and so that's where we're seeing the biggest population in growth. As far as on the younger population, we've actually seen a decrease in the under 16 population in our detention facilities. And that's the only reason why we haven't seen that number grow even higher, is because we really have been able to, with the younger population, control the amount of those juveniles going into those juvenile detention centers.
So one quick follow-up. Billy, you were saying that you had that month to sort of adjust to 593. What we've heard is, and I think you've identified, that there is confusion out in the field about how to execute the bond process.
Yes.
And I don't know if this group would be appropriate to look at some procedures about that, because, you know, it's practically brand new in a sense, since we rarely had that under the old law. So I don't know if that's appropriate for this group, but I know that there are stakeholders out there who would like to get some sort of guidance on best practices or whatever on how to do that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Eric. And we just met yesterday, Jackie and Jamie Markham from the UNC School of Government and my management team all met yesterday to see what we could do to pull together. As soon as we had a bunch of questions that we're trying to figure out, is there a legislative change that's needed? I'm willing for our juvenile court counselors to help with that electronic monitoring process. And so if that's something that is needed across the state, we're looking at how we could do that. Right now, we don't know if the statute gives us the authority to do that. A lot of judges want us to do it. We know that. But these kids should be eligible for the pretrial programs that are available in their local communities now. And I think it's just explaining to the people that run those pretrial programs that they are eligible. Just because they're in a juvenile detention center, they're being served by the adult court system. And so we can use the exact same procedures that you were using before August 1st with this population, or before December 1st of last year. Everything you were doing with 16 or 17-year-olds on pretrial before, they're still eligible for that if they've transferred to adult court. And we just need to make sure that that message is getting out there to folks. That process shouldn't have changed. It's just trying to figure out, if they're in a different county where they're being housed now in detention, how do we bring them back to whoever is going to do that process at the local community? And we've had several cases of that where there's just a lot of confusion from the family that's trying to bond the kid out, who's eligible to bond the kid out, and then we transport the kid, you know, from 3 or 4 counties away to the magistrate's office where they're getting ready to get bonded out, and then mom or dad learns that the bond is a lot higher than they thought it was going to be, and they don't have enough money to actually do it, so we end up transporting that kid back, and you can imagine they're not too happy at that point. And so I agree with you completely. We got to figure out a consistent way across the state to set up those procedures so that we're not having those types of situations moving forward. And we'd love to work with you, Eric, and the prosecutors and the magistrates and everybody that has a role in this process in that. And so we're putting together kind of our top issues about how to make this happen. And then we'll send that out to the full group, and would love to get y'all's input and maybe even pull together a group to start meeting on that to see if there's something else we need to do.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move ahead. Thank you, Deputy Secretary, for that report.
Thank you, Chair.
The School Justice Partnership data, LaToya Powell and Ms. Nisha Williams.
Good morning. Took me a minute to figure out how to unmute myself. Hopefully you guys can all hear me. Good morning, everyone, and thank you again for the opportunity to address this committee to give an update on School Justice Partnership. This committee, as well as DPS, of course, has been a strong supporter of the program since the very beginning, and that support has certainly helped to expand and strengthen the program, so we certainly appreciate it. This morning, my co-presenter will be Nisha Williams, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, where she is working on her PhD in Human Development and Family Studies. Ms. Williams was an intern at the AOC this past summer, and she completed a research project for the School Justice Partnership that involved a comprehensive data analysis for 7 SJP counties that has given us today the most detailed information we have about what's going on in SJP counties in terms of school discipline. So I'm going to give a quick update about what has happened in the last year since I last addressed this committee, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nisha to summarize some of the high points of her research. So, I think the last time I addressed the JJAT, we were in the process of preparing for the toolkit release, and we held that event on August 12th of last year at Eastern Guilford High School. We had a press conference which featured Chief Justice Beasley, Governor Roy Cooper, our Director McKinley Wooten, Deputy Secretary Billy Lassiter, Secretary Hooks, and multiple state and local officials who attended and expressed their support for the expansion and development of school justice partnerships in North Carolina. That same day, DPS also held a school safety summit at UNCG. So we had a full day of just really exciting, energetic support for school justice partnerships and school discipline reform in general. It was a really exciting way to officially kick off the program after years, it seems, of working to get it started. Shortly following, a couple months later, last November, the Chief Justice convened all 40-something Chief District Court judges at the School of Government for a workshop specifically focused on school justice partnership and recovery courts. And so the purpose of this workshop was to educate and train judges about their role as conveners and how to go out and start doing this work. Now, we know that Judge Corpening has already told them how to do that, but this was an opportunity to kind of refocus and re-energize the judges, and also to help clear up some misinformation. As you all know, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of misinformation going around about school justice partnerships, and there was, a kind of a campaign to try to get school districts not to participate. And so we have done a lot of work to try to correct that misinformation and to both educate and train judges and other stakeholders about the actual goals and purposes of the program, how it actually works, and the positive impact that it has already had in North Carolina. So that day also was an opportunity for us to clear up any confusion for the judges. As you might imagine, the development of school justice partnerships has really increased and took off at that point. And so due to the tremendous growth that we've had, in February of this year, we at the AOC officially moved the School Justice Partnership Program from the Office of General Counsel, where I work, to court programs. And it is now an official court program of the AOC. And we have appointed a program manager, DeShield Green, who has been with AOC for many years in various roles. It is now the School Justice Partnership Program Manager. And if you have worked with DeShield, have ever encountered her in any capacity, you know that she is just wonderful. She is very full of energy and extremely hardworking, so we couldn't be happier to have her on board. And it's my hope that the next time you ask for an update on SJP, she will be the one giving the update. So she is here listening today as an attendee, but she will begin to have a much bigger role in leading some of these training and informational presentations about the program. Another thing that we did, and I'm hoping this doesn't start playing, last fall, we officially released a video about the School Justice Partnership Program, which features Judge Corpening and lots of the stakeholders from New Hanover County who took the time to tell us about how the School Justice Partnership has positively impacted kids in New Hanover County. And so this is just a wonderful, short, but powerful video. It's about 7 minutes long, where you will hear from almost every stakeholder involved: the Chief District Court Judge, the Chief of Police, the School Superintendent, the elected District Attorney, and others who will tell you from their various perspectives what this program has meant to New Hanover County and why we need it in other areas of the state. So if you're still wondering, like, what is this School Justice Partnership Program about? If you have people in your community who need to be educated about the program, send them this video, which I think will really help to explain why we are doing this work. And so in the last year, I mentioned that after the kickoff, we had a lot of counties start convening meetings, and that has resulted in an increase in the number of School Justice Partnership MOUs and resolutions that have been signed. As of today, we have School Justice Partnerships in 36 counties across the state. 27 of those agreements were signed after the toolkit release, so that's a lot of growth in the last year. And we have 20 additional counties that are in the developmental stage. So they have already held kickoff meetings and are continuing to meet to work on the details of the program in their counties. I know Judge Rader is here, and Wake County is one of those counties that has been really hard, worked really hard to develop their school justice partnership, and I think like many counties got sidetracked because of the pandemic. So I know for a fact that there were several signing ceremonies that had already been scheduled for the spring that have now been postponed because of the shutdown due to COVID. So people are out there collaborating, meeting, working to try to get this program started to help reduce the number of kids coming into court for the minor, typical routine misconduct that we know can be adequately and effectively addressed in school and in the community. If you want to see the full list of counties that have a school justice partnership or that have convened a meeting and are in the developmental stage, you can find that list at our website at sjp.nccourts.gov. So at this time, I am going to turn it over to Nisha to talk about the work that she did for us. And this was a really massive project, and we don't have time to really tell you all the information we learned because this was involved an analysis of several years of data looking at various trends, everything from overall school-based offenses to various categories based on age, the age of the child, the type of offenses being referred, demographics like gender and race and ethnicity. So we were able to learn a lot about what's going on in these counties. And Nisha is just going to hit the highlights for you this morning due to lack of time. So Nisha, if you want to go ahead and jump in, I'll turn it over to you.
LaToya, can you confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. All right.
So you're scrambled. Your audio is scrambled. I can't hear you anymore.
I can't either. So, LaToya, can you and maybe Kim can start working with Nisha to try to get it going? And do you have enough knowledge to move it forward until we can get her?
I do.
Okay.
I can go ahead and start, and then when Nisha can get back, she can take over. So the data analysis focused on 7 counties, as I mentioned, and that is because we wanted to essentially have meaningful data to review. I just said that many of those counties with a school justice partnership just developed the program after or as of between August of last year and today. So we looked at 7 counties where the program has been in existence for at least 2 years, and that's Brunswick, Greene, Lenoir, Mecklenburg, New Hanover, Stanley, and Wayne. And we felt like we had enough data where we could go back looking at the year prior to the implementation of the SJP in each county, all the way up to today, to see what has been going on with school-based referrals in those counties. And so what we found, again, we have a lot of detailed information, and all of this is based on data that came from DPS. So as I said earlier, DPS has been a wonderful partner and has made its data available to us. So we were able to collect that data, and as I said, Misha analyzed it to sort of give us a more comprehensive picture of what's been going on. But overall, what we saw is that looking at the year of implementation of each of these 7 counties to today, 5 of the 7 counties have experienced a decrease, an overall decrease in the number of school-based complaints coming into the system since the School Justice Partnership was implemented in those counties. And so in Brunswick County, where the SJP was established in July of 2017, we've seen a 79% decrease in the total number of school-based complaints from the year prior, 2016, up to 2020. And that's looking at specifically the number of total complaints in calendar year 2016 versus the total number in 2020. Now, I'll show you in a minute what's happened each in the years in between, but just looking at from the date of implementation to today, a 79% decrease. Lenoir County, there was a total 74% decrease looking at 2017 to 2020. In Mecklenburg County, a 39% decrease from 2016 to 2020. New Hanover County, there was a 23.4% decrease from 2016 to 2020. And then in Stanley County, there was a 20.3% decrease from 2017 to 2020. So in these counties, there's been an overall decrease since the year before the implementation of the School Justice Partnership. I'm going to check really quickly before I move on to see if Misha is back with us. Misha, are you able to join at this point? Okay, so I'll keep going. The other 2 counties, we saw that there was an overall increase. That was Greene County and Wayne County, and I'll talk a little bit more about some potential reasons for that. But in these 2 counties, when you look at the year before implementation, which in Greene County it was 2017, to what we see today, there was a 24% increase. In Wayne County, there was a 15.1% increase. When you look at the bigger picture, we can see what's happening year by year. And so in Brunswick County, for example, there's been a steady decline in the total number of school-based complaints coming into juvenile justice. And so, you know, we would like to be able to take a closer look to see exactly what is causing that decline, but this is obviously a really positive impact that's happening in Brunswick County. In Greene County, there has been sort of back and forth, so the numbers have gone up and then down. And then in 2020, there was a 40% increase from 2019 to 2020. We noticed that in a couple of the counties where there had been some decline in the total number of school-based complaints, between 2019 and 2020, there was a slight increase, like we see here in Greene County. And one thing that possibly could account for that is that RtA Age, as we know, took effect on December 1st of 2019. So as of December 1st, 2019, the school-based complaint data includes 16 and 17-year-olds. Before December 1, 2019, it did not include 16 and 17-year-olds. So that may be one factor that caused a slight increase between 2019 and 2020 in Greene County. Lenoir County, like Mecklenburg, has seen a steady decline in school-based complaints since the implementation of their school justice partnership, so that was really positive to see. Mecklenburg was one of those counties where there had been a steady decline up to 2019, and then between 2019 and 2020, there was an increase of 63%. So as Billy mentioned earlier in his presentation, Mecklenburg is one of those counties that has had the highest volume of raise the age complaints coming into the system. So that very likely could be the reason why they experienced an increase in school-based complaints between 2019 and 2020 due to that raise the age population. And New Hanover County has had an overall decline, although there was a slight increase in the number of school-based complaints between 2018 and 2019. When you look at Stanley County, there was a decline until, again, 2020, the numbers went up, maybe because of raise the age, but we have to do a little bit of digging deeper and work with those stakeholders to figure out exactly what was happening. But again, knowing that raise the age took effect in December of 2019, that likely is accounting for the increase that we see also in Wayne County between 2019 and 2020. So one thing that we looked at in addition to overall changes in the number of school-based complaints was disproportionality. And what we found, as you probably are not surprised, is that in every county, Black students are more likely than their peers to receive a school-based complaint. When you look at the 2019 calendar year data, this is what we found in each of the 7 counties with respect to disproportionality. In Brunswick, Black students were 2 times more likely to receive a school-based complaint based on their percentage of the population. In Greene County, 1.4 times more likely. In Lenoir, almost 2 times more likely. In Mecklenburg, 2 times more likely. New Hanover, 4 times more likely. Stanley, 2.5 times more likely, and in Wayne, 1.6 times more likely. So clearly, this is an area that we would like to focus on and try to figure out what we can do better to impact the racial inequity that we are seeing with respect to school-based complaints. It's a great thing that overall school-based complaints are going down, but when we continue to see a particular group of students who is consistently overrepresented, then we need to figure out how to address that. So we didn't just look at Black students, we also looked at the Hispanic, Latino population and the population of white students. And generally, for both of those groups, they are less likely than their peers to be referred to court for a school-based offense. Again, the data is very detailed, and I'm happy to provide that to anyone who would like to see it. But due to the lack of time, we just wanted to kind of hit some high points. What we are planning to do next is to share this information with each of the stakeholders, or primarily with the conveners, the district court judges who convene the school justice partnership in each of these counties, so that they can then share it with the rest of the stakeholders in their local community and use it to evaluate the program and figure out what steps to take next to improve or strengthen the program. We would love to be able to continue to expand the data collection and analysis to include all of our SJP counties, but we've got to figure out how to get resources to do that. Unfortunately, Nisha was only with us for 10 weeks, so we don't have her on a permanent basis to collect this data and continue to analyze it for us. So I see your comment, Ruby, and I'll make sure that you get the data. So our goal would be to have someone who can continue to collect the data, and not just the DPS data, but we want to be able to have a much fuller picture that would include also the school-based outcomes. So we also try very hard to include information about suspensions, expulsions, alternative school referrals, and other types of school-based exclusionary discipline. But unfortunately, the data is just not as readily available regarding school discipline within the schools. And what we were able to get was not compatible with the information that we have from DPS. For example, the consolidated report that DPI prepares for the legislature reports suspensions and other exclusionary discipline outcomes as rates of suspension. And we needed the raw numbers to be able to evaluate, what it looks like in each county for each particular demographic group. And we were unable to get that information from DPI. So we're working really hard to try to get information that is meaningful, that will allow us to do the same type of analysis that we did with the court referral information. But we have looked at some of the information, and again, we're trying to understand what is going on. We would like to have a fuller picture of what school discipline looks like, and also be able to determine more specifically what is driving the change in the reduction of school-based complaints. So we will, hopefully with the support of this group, try to figure out some ways to get more resources to put into the program. We also would like to revise and update the toolkit in collaboration with our other school justice partnership stakeholders. And as we've been discussing with this committee, consider legislative proposals that might help to strengthen the program. One that I'll mention specifically that we've talked about before is the possibility of recommending an amendment to the provision in the Juvenile Justice Reinvestment Act that created school justice partnerships. That amendment, it would be great to have more specific language defining what a school justice partnership is to allow for more structure to the program. And so I don't have a lot of time to talk about it today, but what we've seen is that in some of our counties, the school justice partnership agreements that have been signed are lacking the type of structure and guidance that we would like to see and that we recommend in the toolkit. And so we don't know if those programs are going to be as effective as perhaps New Hanover and Mecklenburg County's program, because they're not really based on the model that we are trying to promote. So we would love to discuss further the possibility of modifying that legislation, as well as also seeking additional resources to strengthen the program. So at this point, I'll take any questions. Again, I'm happy to share the full data, set of data that we have for the research that Nisha did with anybody who asked, and hopefully at some point we'll have it up on our website.
LaToya, do any of the model agreements have anything that intentionally talks about race in those school justice partnerships?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. The model agreement?
Or in some of the agreements that we... that have been signed so far, do they have some intentional language about race in those?
They do. I believe, and I know Judge Courtney on the call, I believe New Hanover County's MOU requires that certain factors be taken into account when trying to determine how to respond to school-based conduct, and that it also intentionally requires that certain factors not impact the decision, including race and disability status and things of that nature. So we obviously make that recommendation in the toolkit that the MOU should absolutely include racial equity measures, and some of the more structured MOUs do in fact do that.
We, Judge Corkney and I both presented on, I think it was Monday, about school resource officers and the role of school resource officers and the school justice partnership to the racial equity, the governor's racial equity task force. And, you know, the data that we've pulled together shows that we've made really good progress at reducing the number of school-based offenses, you know. But the problem is that racial gap has remained stubbornly high and hadn't really changed. It's been about a 60-38 breakdown between the different groups for the last 10 years. And we can share that data with the full group so they can see that. So obviously, I'm really proud of the work that you guys have done, and thank you to Nisha for doing the study. It's very helpful in promoting what the School Justice Partnership is about. I'd love for us to try to figure out if there's something more that we can do on that racial equity issue. And if anybody's got some ideas, I think the governor's task force is very open to that and looking at some of that language. And of course, this Juvenile Jurisdiction Advisory Committee can make some of those recommendations also. But if there's a specific recommendation that we should be looking at as far as the racial equity issue as it relates to school justice partnerships, I think that would be great to put forward.
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate that. And I am aware that the governor's task force on racial equity is also looking at this issue as it relates to school policing and racial inequities involved in our school discipline outcomes. And so we would love to work with that group. And I know that one recommendation has been to improve the data collection, which is key. I mean, I don't really have time to talk about how difficult it was to try to get really meaningful information, but it shouldn't be that difficult to find and access data about what's happening with our kids in school. So I think that's the starting point, is to just make the data more readily available so that it's there for everyone to see and acknowledge that we need to do better. But thank you. And Nisha, I'm sorry, I know that you had some technical difficulties, but I just want to emphasize that her research was really incredible and it's much more detailed than what I was able to share this morning, but really appreciate all the work that she did for us, and this is going to be a valuable, really valuable research for us going forward and helping us to strengthen the program. And congratulations to Judge Rader.
And LaToya, this is McKinley. I have a question, if you can hear me okay.
I can.
Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me ask this question. And LaToya, thank you, Anisha, for this great work. And you know what an asset I feel that you are to our staff at AOC. So I want to say that to you publicly. Probably don't say it enough for the great work that you do, not only in this, but for our group. I wanted to talk that, you know, on this disproportionality issue, I think that one of the things that I was reminded as you were talking about it, you know, when we talk about abuse and neglect cases, and when you start looking at reporters, teachers are reporters, and I think that a lot of the reports, and then of course a judge ultimately has to make that decision whether it was in fact abuse and neglect of a child. But I do think that when you start going back to the sources, I think that, as you know, when these partnerships are signed, it is the superintendent who usually is the signer. But when these decisions are made, they're at the principal level. So I do think that as we start going back and looking at this data, that it's important not only to take it to the judge who was the convener, but to the superintendent to say, this is what your numbers look like, so that the superintendent can then start talking to principals, because those are the decision points.
Right.
And so I think when principals are faced with, this is the data that has come out of, this school, and, the numbers from your school, then I think a meaningful discussion then has to take place, about, what's going into this decision, what other things are you looking at before this decision is made to send this, case to court. So I do think that, as we look at taking the data that's been collected and sending it back to the partnership, I think is really important on the disproportionality issue for this information to be in the hands of the superintendents, who then can start talking to principals about, how these decisions are made on the front end. So again, thank you for your work on it.
Yeah, that is our plan, McKinley. That's what we are hoping to happen. We want our judges to go back and have discussions with their school stakeholders, show them the data, try to get more information about their data so that they can really be intentional about how to tackle the disproportionality, because it's just, like you said, the constant thing that we haven't really been able to resolve. And we do have some ideas that we, about the collection that we think might give us a better idea about what's happening, including being able to collect data about the demographic of the reporter, the race and ethnicity of the person who is making the referral. I think matters when we're trying to figure out where is this disproportionality happening. And so that was actually one of the recommendations that Nisha made. And so we are working as hard as we can to try to figure out ways to improve this process. And going forward, this disproportionality will be the top issue that we hope to address.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions?
Latoya, real quickly. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was just thinking about to your point about the reporters and how their bias might play into the reporting piece. I think that's definitely a place where we can collaborate with the Division of Mental Health, because we're looking closely at that in regard to assessments, and so particularly in detention centers in YDC. So I'll look forward to just having a conversation with you and DeShield offline about how we might be able to kind of look at some of this collaboration across those two areas, because I do think we've seen that same data that it plays a part into that.
Thank you. I look forward to that as well, Ruby, and thank you for that. We're working on a data collection template that will go into the toolkit that we hope will require the stakeholders to collect this type of information when they make a referral to court. And again, with the help of this body and hopefully with the Racial Equity Task Force, that's something that we might see happen in the future.
Mr. Chair, I've got a comment, if I may, Jay Corpening.
Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you. So to Billy's point and Latoya's and also McKinley's, when we go to a district to work on a school justice partnership, and I've been to about 30 counties in person to work with them, race equity is at the forefront of the conversation. When I met with the Wake County stakeholders, for example, that's an upfront part of the conversation, and because that's one of the important reasons that we do this. Yes, we want to lower referrals to court, but achieving racial equity is one of the top reasons to do this work, and so we do have that conversation. Building on that, our model also calls for districts to have something that's called a progress monitoring team or a review team that meets regularly to review their individual data. That's important because, for example, our team has ready access to the suspension data because the schools have it. They send it to the Office of Civil Rights on a regular basis, so they have that, and we're able to use that in our conversations. And we encourage districts to do that so that, for example, McKinley, to your point, information LaToya sends to me goes to our progress monitoring team, which includes the superintendent, our race equity officer, our, some principals. It's a broad-based committee, and we're looking at that on a regular basis. And we're encouraging, as part of developing school justice partnerships, that every district have a group like that and looks at their data intentionally, because it is important that we look at it, own it, and then build on it, so that we can make progress. As we look at our data, it's supposed to be a flashlight, not a club, to illuminate an issue so that then we can work together to resolve it. One thing about the data, and I think that a year from now we'll start having a data set that is complete. As Raise the Age has brought in 16 and 17-year-olds, that didn't happen until December 1st. So, for example, on our data, our 24% reduction shown for referrals to juvenile is actually about 67% in all of our referrals to court, including our 16 and 17-year-olds. So, but we'll have that complete picture, in about a year. I'm not sure that 2020 is going to count for anything, but I think that we'll start getting a more complete data set, and then statewide, as we can get better access to the DPI information, which is incredibly challenging. I'll just echo LaToya's frustration with that. Then I think that we'll make progress. And LaToya, following up on that for just a second, it might be a good idea to reach back to our friends on the State Board of Education for some support with that, because they endorsed the work when we did a presentation to them. And so, they might be willing to help us with a dashboard. And the dashboard is something that Tally Wells was talking about, on the Race Equity Task Force. And if we can have that kind of access to information, then I think that'll be better. So, Mr. Chair, thanks for the time.
No problem. If anyone else have any comments or questions of Ms. Powell? Okay, I really apologize to Ms. Williams and our members as well. We had a little bit of gremlins in our computer system, evidently. So, but I hate that we missed out on Ms. Williams. I'm sure she would have been very helpful. Okay, moving on to the legislative update. Justin Davis.
All right, can you guys confirm that you can hear me? All right. Good morning, chairs and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on legislative happenings. So many of you will be delighted to know that my comments will be fairly brief today. Deputy Secretary Laster has covered a lot of what I'm about to say, so please forgive me in advance if any of this is repetitive. Roughly a week after the JJAC's last meeting, the legislature returned to Raleigh to begin the short session. And if you recall, heading into that short session, there was a lot of uncertainty. Many wondered how long the General Assembly would be in town in light of the pandemic. Others were curious as to how they'd actually conduct their business. And many speculated as to, really which issues would actually be taken up during that time period for when they came back into town from, I'd say, May to early July. Well, to no one's surprise, really, much of the bandwidth on Jones Street was directed towards COVID-related matters. So the legislature really started out with state allocation of CARES Act funding of $3.6 billion. So that's the CRF funds, or what they're also referred to as a lot of times, coronavirus relief funds. So when I last spoke to you in May about things, about $1.5 billion had been appropriated. And so during the course of from when I last spoke to you up until this point, obviously there were several bills that came forth to appropriate more CRF funds. Right now, at this point in time, there's an estimated $978 million in coronavirus relief funds, CRF. So as Deputy Secretary Laster stated, Governor Cooper released his budget proposal Wednesday. That included recommendations for how that remaining CARES Act funding should be spent. It remains to be seen, though, as to how or whether the General Assembly will take any action when they come back mid next week. It's important, though, to point out that the CRF funds can be used for expenses incurred through December 30th of this year. So I imagine they will take some action next week since the time is quickly approaching. So we'll have to stay tuned to see kind of where those funds are actually provided to going forward. But we should know quite a bit more at this point next week. So in terms of state revenue projections, Deputy Secretary Laster also mentioned this, but back in May, I shared that there were major concerns about the impacts of COVID on state revenues. After my update, Fiscal Research Division over at the legislature, they released an initial revenue forecast, and that estimate was for about a $4.2 billion shortfall for the current biennium. So our budget, as you all know, is somewhere around 24 to 25 billion that actually comes out of the legislature each year. So it's quite a hit. As mentioned earlier, though, it's because of the tax deadline delays, they're actually going to release a revised revenue forecast. From what I'm hearing, it's going to be no earlier than late September. So we'll have to see kind of what that looks like, anyone's guess. Want to shift gears to legislation I know you all are interested in. As noted in the interim JJAT report, the majority of legislative recommendations provided by this body has now been enacted by into law. So I'm happy to report on that. As Deputy Secretary Laster mentioned, House Bill 593 became session law towards the end of session. This piece of legislation was something that we really were successful at getting inserted into a bill, another bill, 593. Some of the language that was taken over from House Bill 702 that dealt with modifications to juvenile crime prevention councils. So we were very fortunate and want to thank Senator Warren Daniel for doing that for us. Also, as Billy had mentioned, the law also provides clarity on the detention housing of persons under the age of 18. This is going to definitely be of benefit because this will help ensure our state can remain in compliance with the federal Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act requirements that go set forth some of the changes starting next year. So we're happy to see that. On July 6th, Kimberly Quintus emailed each of you a summary of the bills of interest that I had put together. Really nothing's changed since that time, and probably in the interest of time, I would invite you all to, revisit that summary, reach out to me if you have any questions. But the legislature, has not been in town roughly since that email was sent out. So there's not a whole lot of changes to it, but that list pretty much provides everything we've been kind of tracking from the long session and the short session. So please reach out to me if you have any questions. My email address is justin.davis@ncdps.gov. So wrapping up, as I mentioned, both the House and Senate will reconvene this coming Wednesday. According to the joint adjournment resolution that they passed back in July, really the only bills that they're planning to take up are those that appropriate federal funds that have been received in response to COVID. They're going to act on any appointments or filling of vacancies that have been in the General Assembly, or they're possibly going to act on any gubernatorial nominations and appointments. So those are the three really limited areas that they plan to focus on. Now, of course, that resolution can be amended But right now, as it stands, when they adjourn next Thursday, as stated in the resolution, the legislature will stand adjourned for good unless a special session were to be called. So that would end the short session, and then we'll start all over again in early January when they come back for the long session. So that concludes my comments and update, Mr. Chair. So I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Mr. Davis. Okay, hearing no questions, thank you, Justin, for that presentation, and we appreciate your keeping our committee very well informed.
Thank you, sir.
Next is the YASI implementation, Ms. Armwood and Ms. Moore.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I wanted to make sure. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share with you some changes that we will be making as it relates to our risk and needs assessment. We have had the opportunity to look statewide, nationally, to see what type of evidence-based risk and needs assessments were out there. Our current risk and needs assessment we have been using for many years, and it has served us well. It's given us the data and information that we needed. But Dr. Jean Steinberg, before she retired, led a committee, a group, to go out and do a national search to see what else exists and how it would benefit North Carolina, because one of the things that we were looking for is an instrument that took into consideration the strengths of the youth and families. Our current risk and needs assessment doesn't provide that information for us as it currently exists. Also, we wanted an instrument that was more dynamic, because our current risk and needs assessment have also been kind of static. Some of the information, it really doesn't tell us when a child progresses. And so we wanted an instrument. And so as part of that, Dr. Steinberg and the committee, as I said, did research to find and look at all different instruments that were validated. And so the team looked at several, and they came back with YAZI. Some people call it YAZI. So Dave would tell you, call it whatever make you happy. So as part of that, we're working on trying to get this instrument trained for all of our staff. And the other thing that the YAZI provides is that it also uses motivational interviewing techniques, which all of our staff has already been trained on and very familiar with. And so this will actually help us in developing our service plan. We're hoping it will help with the service plan development and in years to come be part of the service matching and utilization, and currently it does utilize our service directory. My team and I would take the lead, my team would take the lead in sharing and going through the PowerPoint presentation with you. And so I have Candace Moore, who is our evidence-based practice coordinator, and Crystal Wynn Lewis, who is our RED coordinator. They would take the lead in doing the presentation, as well as Dr. Dave Robertson, who is the assessment director for YAZI, and he's also the co-founder of this instrument. So I'm going to turn it over to them and let them present this as quickly as we possibly can, with sharing the information, as much information with you as possible. Candy or Crystal?
Good morning. Thank you, Maxine, for that information. Good morning. I'm Crystal Wynn Lewis. I'm the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Coordinator for Juvenile Justice. I want to definitely begin by thanking the multidisciplinary team of professionals that served on the YAZI committee and the leadership of Maxine. It's through their hard work that this implementation phase is underway. This YAZI presentation is provided to you, the members of the Juvenile Jurisdiction Advisory Committee, because juvenile justice is changing the way it assesses youth. And we believe that better outcomes to youth, especially by including those protective factors in the assessment process, will benefit all in our system. We also believe that you having knowledge of this implementation plan and the reasons why we're making this change may serve you in your roles on the committee as well as in the community. So because of the time factor, if there are questions from the audience, please utilize the chat. I will be monitoring the chat to document all the questions. If you would include your email address, we'll be sure to get back to you. For the committee members, you do have the opportunity at the end. Hopefully we'll have enough time. But at this time, without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to the Director of Assessments, Dr. Robert Robinson, who also is one of the co-creators of the Yazzie instrument. Dr. Robinson?
Thanks very much, Crystal. Well, I'm very happy to be here today. It's been very exciting to work with North Carolina on this implementation of Yazzie. They're very well prepared, and staff have been tremendous. The leadership team has been tremendous. So, again, happy to have this opportunity to give you a glimpse into what Yazzie looks like and how it will work. I won't spend too much time about our company, Orbis Partners, but we were founded in 2000. So we've been doing Yazzie for more than 20 years, actually. Our company is now owned by MST Services. Many of you will know MST, Multi-Systemic Therapy based in Atlanta. We're thrilled to be aligned with them as well. So Yazzie's been around for a while, as I mentioned. Here are some of the jurisdictions. I won't go through them, but we have a number of statewide implementations, including both community jurisdictions as well as custody, DJJ type jurisdictions across the country. Also, a number of large and small counties use Yazzie. We feel that even though it's 20 years old, it's an innovative assessment tool. I'm going to show you a little bit about why that is. It does measure for risk of recidivism, but it's also very helpful, and the main purpose would be to develop service plans to address the risk that's been assessed. Here are some of the typical domains. We've added a couple of new ones for North Carolina. I'm going to show you that, but I'm not going to go through these. They're fairly standard domains or need domains within juvenile justice assessment, but we also include strengths, and I've sort of shown these kind of to show off our strength focus, because we not only measure the need or the risk area, but we also measure these protective factors, the positives, the assets, the strengths that they bring to the table. So that's a really important thing that I'm most excited about in working with this tool over the years. We've added 2 new domains for North Carolina. Basic needs, looking at youth and families who are struggling with acquiring basic needs to live their lives, and also physical health, whether it be conditions or lack of health insurance. So that's been included as well. I'll just go through some of the main features. I mentioned strengths. I always like to talk about it. The tool is also gender responsive, in the sense that we've developed special scoring cutoffs for girls and boys, because most of the juvenile assessment tools don't really correct for the fact that girls generally recidivate at lower levels than boys, and also have some different need profiles. So that has been engineered into the assessment tool. It also includes trauma measuring. We have most of the measures of the adverse childhood experience, the ACE scale. And that's important. We all know that this population, juvenile justice population, has experienced much higher rates of exposure to traumatic events in their childhood. So it's an important factor in developing service plans. Risk need responsivity, for those of you familiar with that principle or platform that guides interventions, that's solidly woven into this. And also, as Maxine mentioned, motivational interview. So it's a nice fit with where North Carolina is now, JJ, because they've all been trained. Case planning is built into this system, so staff are learning a new way to develop case plans based on the assessment. And a big part of that is working with you to do that. We also have quite a bit built into YASI that allows us to be more sensitive to measuring change, more dynamic, as Maxine mentioned. So we have some scoring and design of the scores that allow us to do a little better job of measuring change over reassessment. How's my time? Does somebody want to let me know just how?
You're doing good, Dr. Robinson.
Okay.
It's 11:56.
What's that?
You're doing well. Continue.
Okay. I won't go into this because I know we are short on time. This chart, for me, it's a beautiful chart, but I know it's very busy or beautiful bar chart. But it highlights some of the findings that we have with YASI related to this whole business of including strengths in our assessment or our measurement approach with justice-involved youth. So we're looking at here, this is a sample from close to 3,000 youth who were assessed with YASI in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. And we looked at their risk levels, low, moderate, high, which gave us good predictive data in terms of who were more likely to have trouble in the long term or even in the short term. This was over 12 months, this particular sample. But digging down a little bit deeper, we also saw that strengths provides more information. It completes the picture, gives us a much more comprehensive view of the youth. What we see in each level of risk, low, moderate, and high, strengths exerts an influence as well. So even if you're a low-risk youth, if you're low in strengths, you don't do as well as low-risk youth who are high in strength. And that follows from moderate-risk youth and even high-risk youth. So a really important finding and confirmation that it's important to include strength excuse me, in our predictive formulas. You mentioned gender responsive already. I should mention as well that the tool has been validated in several statewide jurisdictions and also other county jurisdictions like Milwaukee. And the tool also not only gender, but has a roughly equivalent predictive accuracy statistics for Black, white, and Hispanic youth. So it tends to be the case that African American youth have higher recidivism rates, but the rates that we observe are consistent, and there's a linear, are consistent with their risk levels. So that's important. Mentioned trauma, getting a better indication of where this youth is coming from in terms of their family experience and how that might relate to how we develop their case plans and the style and methods that we use to interact with them and talk them out. So those are kind of some of the main points about YASI that I wanted to mention. I'll come back and say a few more things as well. I'll let Candace take over on this one.
Hi, everybody. I'm Candace Moore. So can you hear me? Crystal, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, Candace.
Thank you. So as Maxine mentioned earlier, so I am part of the YASI team, so trying to support the implementation of YASI. So within juvenile justice, so I do evidence-based practices. So, and that includes being a part of the motivational interviewing training team, as well as working on the service directory and being involved with the reentry grant so early on. So which kind of was the basis for how we came to YASI. So I do want to point out with this slide, and so I'll be very quick with this, that our North Carolina legal requirements have been met. So, and I want to thank Juliana Cherry, Dr. Robinson, as well as others who helped us to make sure that we were meeting all those statutory requirements, so with our YASI tool. And so the YASI assessment tool does cover all the necessary areas. So we can move forward. So our YASI assessment and screening instrument, the pre-screen that you have a copy of is actually has 33 items on it. We did add an additional item, so that is a physical health item to the pre-screen. And so that won't be on what you have currently, so that is being added and as part of our customizations. So also part of our customizations are that we did add questions to the full assessment, but I think we've already mentioned that as well. So I do think that it's important to point out that this is not just a question and answer, but that it is done through a semi-structured interview, and it does build off of, as we've mentioned before, our motivational interviewing. So 105 total items, but that 105 total items does include the pre-screen items as well. Should go ahead. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Robinson. Here, I think he's going to show us a couple screenshots of what it actually looks like. Unmute.
Wheel. This is kind of what YASI is famous for. It looks pretty busy, but staff really get to like how this wheel diagram can summarize and profile the risks, the needs, and the strengths that you present. So on the outside of the wheel along the circumference in red is we have scores for each of the major domains, and you can see here that we have a score for basic needs, which we didn't have before in other implementations of YASI. So that's unique to North Carolina. We also have, so that's a basic needs, basic needs. We also have a domain for physical health, which is new in North Carolina. So on the outside of the wheel, we have the very focused or specific areas that could become part of the service planning process. On the inside of the wheel, we show the strengths, what positives there are, what protective factors, assets that may be personal or support or in the environment of the youth. And then over on the left of the wheel screen, we have the overall score. So that's, I just wanted to show you very quickly, once a staff or a court counselor, for example, enters all of the information in the assessment, this is what they get back as results. And then we move through this with our software to start making service planning decisions. And that brings us to collaborative casework. With collaborative casework, we really advocate, but bring the youth into the process. And that's what our training model will focus on, is how we help the youth understand what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and work together to develop a case plan for them. So we have, I won't get into too much detail here, but we have this great feedback process. I love it. And as we introduce it to people and they get using it, they think it's very cool too. But the whole idea is these youth are answering a lot of questions, and they know they're being kind of under the microscope a bit. So this is the opportunity is taken to brief them on what their assessment results are. And we always start the briefing by telling them what their strengths are. So we've done a lot of interviewing with you, but one of the things we've heard is you have a lot of strengths. You have some protective factors. You have some things that you're good at, and some skills. So we talk to them about that, kind of build them up, if you will. And then we move into what we talk about as their challenges. And then moving from that, we talk to them about what incentives they have for change and where they want to start. And it's a very motivating piece in this whole process. So not just assessment and results, but what we're going to do with the results with the youth, and together with the youth. That's important. We have a little we call it feedback. It's pretty simple, but we don't use the terms that we use on the wheel or YASI, like adaptive skills or community peers. We translate it into more user-friendly language, like friends and influences, solving problems, that kind of thing. And it's kind of a little diagram that you can doodle on to bring you to the process. Okay, I'm close to finishing up here. Everybody okay for time, or just a few more minutes? All right. Okay. So the software, we call it Casework, we integrate it with NC Join. And so caseworkers go into NC Join, pull up the youth that they're working with, and then seamlessly goes into YASI. They do their assessment, and it brings the assessment data back into NC Join, the new data management system for the department. So that's been a major project that has worked out really well so far. So enter the assessment information. We have the graphic results that are produced. There's a narrative report. So you not only look at the results in terms of scores, but there's a narrative that's generated that people can read, which is kind of nice. It also does statistical reports, and also critical is there's the case planning steps built into the software. So we get the results. Now we start digging in a little further into the results to see how we can use those for case plans. And the software does a nice job of guiding the court counselor through that process. Just a couple of screens from the software. This is what they would see with a pre-screen results page. This is the wheel, which you've already seen. And this is as we get more into developing the case plans, that can set priorities. They can look at what areas within a particular priority they should focus on first, and all that is done in a very guided way to help them make decisions. And then again, they bring that to these to start incorporating these participation in this whole process. So I will hand it over to Candace now.
Hi, everybody, again. So just real quickly, want to point out our implementation plan. So we have ongoing work with, of course, the Casework software development, NC Joint integration, and our YASI customization. So we're trying to make sure that, of course, it works well within our existing data management system, so that the user doesn't really see any difference from being in NC Joint than being in YASI. So to complete the assessment. Starting in June, we collaborated with YASI and Orbis, and we began providing orientation sessions for our juvenile justice leadership and managers. We provided a total of 11 presentations, and so that included Dr. Robinson, who we're very thankful for, was able to join us to do that. So in July and August, then, the software was released in stages, and it's now functional in NC Joint training environment. We have further enhancements that are currently underway, including but not limited to the service matching component that will link the Juvenile Justice Service Directory with YASI. We began training all existing staff to administer the tool in July. This training will continue through December. We started with training our future North Carolina coaches and experts. Their initial training will be complete in mid-September. Then specific coaching training will begin later in September and October. We have also begun training all additional staff that either would be involved in the administration or case planning of the YASI. And once completed, we will have trained and coached 500-plus staff from all sectors within juvenile justice. So we're working hard to ensure that all staff are well prepared for our official implementation date of January 1st, 2021. to go ahead and move forward. So as you know, with our COVID restrictions, what we would have liked to have had would have been face-to-face training, and that was what was planned. But with our COVID restrictions, we've had to scale that back. And so, but we are using a model that has been effective in other states. So by using an e-training where our staff log in, they actually takes about 10 to 12 hours to complete. It is self-paced. It does include videos. It does include quizzes, so some scenarios. So I've currently went through that, and Crystal has as well. And so it does take the full 10 to 12 hours to complete. But then that's followed up by the virtual follow-up training, which is done with, we log in, and we have 4 2-hour sessions and with the trainers, and that is for coaching, individual assignments, group practice, and further skill development. And so those are limited to a group of 10 to 15 participants in each group. So it has been, so for me, I think the training has been very worthwhile. It has really built off of, and there's so much motivational interviewing in the training that we really appreciate it. It's felt like it's such a great match for us. So, so even though we've had to deal with the COVID restrictions, I think we're doing a great job of trying to keep everybody, or get everybody ready for implementation. So you can move forward, Dr. Robinson.
So we do have our first question, Candace, and this is probably for Maxine. So Eric Zoggy is asking, will there be some training? Will there be some education for judges, defenders, and prosecutors on how to read and understand these reports? Is Maxine still with us? Okay.
I'm not sure if she is. Oh, there she is.
Can you not hear me?
Now we can, Maxine.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, thank you, Krista, and thanks, Eric, for that question. That was one of the things that I was going to mention. Starting next month, we will be sending letters out to all of our judicial partners and others, letting them know about the change, sharing information, providing them some information to read, and we will set up some virtual sessions for our judiciary to be able to log in and for us to discuss it, provide some more detailed information for the child's attorney, defense attorneys, our judges, anyone who would like to be a part of learning more about how we are going to, how this instrument will be benefiting us in the future. I also wanted to mention that when we provide the dispositional report, because as you know, we're required to incorporate a risk and needs assessment, we will be providing a copy of the YAZI summary, the wheel, as well as the full YAZI assessment so that everyone would know and be able to see what the results were of the assessment. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Maxine. There aren't any other questions in the chat box. Are there any questions from the audience or committee members?
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. Folks, I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you for all that. Very good information, and it's good to hear that we're moving forward with a very good assessment instrument, sounds like, but there's a lot of work to implement it ahead, sounds like, as well. Moving on to any new business that anyone has.
Mr. Chair, Jay Corking, I've got one real quick item.
Yes, go right ahead.
I'll be sending out a WebEx invitation later today to the members of the Minimum Age Study Committee for a meeting next Friday at 9 a.m.
Okay, thank you for that. Kim, do we have any public comments that you're aware of?
No, sir, we have not received any public comment.
Okay. All righty. And I guess next steps is from the chairs. Co-chair Frank, any questions or any comments that you'd like to share with us at this point?
No, sir, not at this time. It's a lot on our plate.
It is. It is. A lot of work being done and a lot of work to do at this point. Speaking of more work, how about our legislative committees? Do we have any updates from any of our folks from the subcommittee? I don't think Heather's with us. Judge Corpening, any update?
I am actually on the call.
Okay.
This is Heather. I don't
Yes.
have any updates. I am interested to hear from folks folks on the committee, whether or not you think at this point we should consider having a meeting remotely. I was trying to hold off and hoping that we would move into phase 3 so that we could meet in person potentially, just given the complexity of the issues that we generally discuss and the number of people who participate in the conversation. Does anyone have any thoughts on whether or not we should continue to wait in the hopes that we could meet in person soon, or that we should have a meeting remote?
Hey, Heather, this is Eric. I'd be glad to meet remotely. I guess my thought would be, because of sort of the evolving process with the legislature, if we did have recommendations, I think I'd kind of like to be ready to go with those instead of maybe be caught still in the process of developing them, depending on how they meet next year. That's my only thought about that.
Heather, can we not meet in social distance?
Well, my understanding, Kim, or if you could speak to that, was that we did need to wait for phase 3 to move into that, but I'm not sure. Kim, do you have any information about what would be permitted?
So the information that I have is in reference to meeting space at this location, and that is that we can fit approximately 10 people social distanced for a meeting. And given the size of the Legislative Revisions and Legal Issues Subcommittee, that size exceeds the 10-person capacity.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Bill. I don't have anything else.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Judge Corpening, anything further from Minimum Age Subcommittee?
We haven't met since January. We did meet in January, but COVID seems to have thrown a wrench in almost everything. So we'll get back to work next week. And we're probably going to reconvene the School Justice Partnership Subcommittee at some point in the near future as well, to take a look at some of the recommendations that are being made by the Race Equity Task Force and some of the things that LaToya brought up, to see if there's specific legislative recommendations that need to be made.
That sounds good. And Housing and Expansion Subcommittee, Deputy Secretary?
Well, we got the House Bill 593 was our big goal, and we got that done, and so we're still working with a lot of the sheriffs on trying to see if there's additional capacity out there. So we've been meeting with smaller groups and getting feedback about how to get all that done. But the bigger group probably needs to meet again once we figure out how to operationalizely do that. So we can certainly, if I heard Judge Freshwater Smith's recommendation, if we need to look at a bigger location for one of these committees, we can certainly work with you and see if there's a way to do that. It's just the space that we have at Hammond, at the place that we normally meet, can only have a capacity of 10, so because of the social distancing. But we could certainly look at other locations or other ways to accomplish that goal. So Heather, we can certainly work with you and try to think through that, and that goes for the other committees too. Certainly you can do it virtually. I know that some of these issues are complicated and you guys want face-to-face on some of those things, and I completely understand that. So Just let us know what your desire is, and we'll work with you and see if we can get it organized.
That sounds good. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anything further from any of our subcommittees? All right. Our next meeting is with the full committee is November the 19th from 10 to 2, and we are hoping that we'll be able to meet in person for that meeting. Hopefully so by then, but if not, then we'll do the best we can with our virtual meeting continuing. All right. Do we have anything further from anyone? If not, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second the motion.
All right. All in favor, we'll be adjourned at this point. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.